In the coldest, darkest hours, even the smallest light can lead a soul back to hope. The evening sky hung heavy with twilight as Jesus and his disciples slowly climbed the hills outside the village. The day had been long, filled with teaching, healing, and walking from town to town. Now, as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the horizon, the air grew cool, and the sounds of distant winds whispered through the olive trees. The disciples, though physically tired, felt the weight of something deeper, an emotional exhaustion, a heaviness they could not quite name. The darkness they had witnessed in the world had begun to cloud their hearts. As they reached a quiet clearing, they settled down for the evening, gathering around a small fire that crackled softly in the cool night air. The warmth of the flames provided some comfort, but the unease among them lingered. They had seen too much pain in recent days, too many people suffering from illness, poverty, and the cruelty of others. Despite their efforts to bring hope and healing, the world still felt overwhelmingly dark. Peter, always the bold one, finally broke the silence. His voice was low, almost as if he feared the words he was about to speak. "Master," he said, looking into the fire, "we see so much suffering. We try to help, we offer what we can, but sometimes it feels like our efforts are just too small. The darkness in the world is so vast. How can our small acts of kindness really make a difference?" The other disciples, though quiet, shared the same doubts. They had seen Jesus perform miracles, heal the sick, and comfort the brokenhearted, but in their own hearts, they wondered if their contributions were enough. Could their acts of compassion and kindness truly push back the overwhelming darkness they encountered day after day? Jesus, who had been gazing up at the stars, turned his attention to Peter and the others. His face, illuminated by the firelight, held a gentle yet knowing expression. He could sense their inner turmoil, their struggle with doubt and fear. His voice, soft but full of authority, broke the stillness of the night. "Peter, and all of you," Jesus began, "there is a story I want to share with you tonight." The disciples leaned in, their attention fully drawn to him. They knew that whenever Jesus spoke in parables, he was about to reveal a deep truth, something that would not only answer their questions but also guide them on a path of greater understanding. "There was once a woman," Jesus began, "who lived in a small, humble village. She was poor, with no family to support her, and her days were filled with hard work. The people of the village often overlooked her, as she did not have much to offer in terms of wealth or status. But what she lacked in material possessions, she made up for in kindness. She was known to a few for her quiet acts of compassion, helping where she could, even if it meant going without herself." Jesus paused, allowing the disciples to picture the woman's life. They imagined her small, worn home, her hands rough from years of labor, and her tired but kind face. She was not someone the world would notice, yet there was a light within her, a light that shone through her acts of love, even if others didn't see it. "One winter," Jesus continued, "a terrible storm descended upon the village. The winds howled, and the snow fell in great sheets, covering the roads and blocking the doors of the homes. The villagers, fearful of the storm's fury, shut themselves inside, huddling by their fires to stay warm. The darkness outside was deep and cold, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. The disciples could almost feel the biting cold of the storm as Jesus spoke. They imagined the wind howling through the narrow streets, the snow piling up against doors, and the eerie silence that comes with a blizzard. It was a darkness that felt suffocating, a cold that seemed endless. But in the midst of this storm, Jesus said, his voice softening, the woman heard a sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but as she listened more closely, she realized it was the sound of a child crying. She opened her door and saw, through the swirling snow, a small figure huddled in the street. It was a young boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, shivering and lost. He had been separated from his family during the storm and had nowhere to go. The disciples' hearts tightened at the image of the child, alone in the cold, vulnerable to the harsh winter winds. They knew the woman had little to give, how could she possibly help when she had so little herself? The woman, Jesus said, looked at the child and felt a deep compassion stir within her. She knew that her own firewood was running low and that she had only enough food to last the night. But she could not bear to leave the child out in the cold. So, without hesitation, she brought him into her home. She wrapped him in her own blanket and placed him by the fire, sharing what little warmth she had. The disciples leaned in closer, captivated by the story. They could see the woman's small, dimly lit home, the fire flickering weakly as the wind howled outside. The child, once trembling with cold and fear, began to warm as the woman's kindness enveloped him. As the night wore on, Jesus continued, the storm outside grew worse. The wind battered the walls and the cold crept into the house, even as the fire began to die down. The woman stoked the fire with the last of her wood, knowing that it would not last much longer. She gave the child the last piece of bread she had, even though it meant she would go hungry. The disciples' hearts ached for the woman. They could feel her sacrifice, her willingness to give everything she had for the sake of the child, even though it would cost her dearly. Hours passed, Jesus said, and the storm showed no sign of ending. The woman, growing weaker from hunger and cold, sat by the fire with the child in her arms. She whispered words of comfort to him, telling him stories to calm his fears, even as her own strength waned. She had given everything she had and now all she could do was wait. The disciples held their breath, the tension in the story growing. Would her sacrifice be in vain? Would the storm claim both her and the child? But then, Jesus said, a note of hope entering his voice, just before dawn the storm began to ease. The wind died down and the snow stopped falling. The woman, exhausted and weak, opened her door to find that the village was blanketed in snow. But as she looked out into the stillness, she saw something she had not expected. There, just outside her door, was a pile of fresh firewood, enough to last her for the rest of the winter. Beside it was a basket of food, and on top of the basket was a small glowing lantern. The disciples' eyes widened in amazement. They had not expected this. How could this be? Where had the wood and food come from? The child's family, Jesus explained, had been searching for him all night. When they found him safe and warm in the woman's care, they were overwhelmed with gratitude. They left the wood, the food, and the lantern as a gift for her, a token of their thanks for saving their son. The disciples felt a wave of relief and joy wash over them. The woman's kindness, given in secret and without expectation, had been returned to her in ways she could never have imagined. But the greatest gift, Jesus said, his voice soft but full of wisdom, was not the wood or the food or even the lantern. The greatest gift was the joy in the woman's heart. She had saved a life. And in giving what little she had brought light to the darkest night, not just for the child but for herself as well. The disciples sat in silence, their hearts full of the truth that Jesus had revealed. They realized now that it was not the size of the act that mattered, but the love and compassion with which it was given. The woman's small act of kindness had not only saved the child, it had also illuminated her own life, filling her heart with a light that could never be extinguished. Jesus looked at each of them, his gaze full of love and understanding. You see, he said gently, it is not the size of the act that matters. It is the heart with which it is given. Even in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness can light the way for someone who has lost all hope. And in doing so, you light a path for yourself as well. The fire crackled softly as the disciples absorbed his words. They had been struggling with the question of whether their efforts were enough, whether their small acts of kindness could truly make a difference in a world so full of suffering. But now they understood. It wasn't about changing the entire world all at once. It was about the small moments, the individual acts of love and compassion, that could make a difference in someone's life. Peter, who had asked the question, felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. So, even when it feels like what we're doing is too small, it matters? He asked quietly. Jesus smiled, his eyes full of kindness. Yes, Peter. it always matters. When you give from the heart, even the smallest light can push back the darkest night. And when you share that light with others, it grows stronger within you. The disciples sat in silence, their hearts filled with a quiet joy. They realized now that their acts of kindness, though they might seem small in the grand scheme of things, were like the woman's fire, able to bring warmth and light to those in need. The night grew darker, but the fire continued to burn brightly, its light flickering in the gentle breeze. The disciples, now at peace, knew that they carried within them the same light, the light of love and kindness that could never be extinguished, no matter how dark the world around them became. Jesus spoke again, his voice soft but full of strength. Whenever you feel lost in the darkness, remember this: the light you share with others will always guide you home. The disciples looked at one another, their eyes filled with understanding and hope. They had been given more than just a story, they had been given a gift, a truth that would guide them for the rest of their lives. They smiled, knowing that the light they carried within them would always be enough to push back the darkness in the world around them. And with that understanding, they knew their journey of kindness and love would never be in vain. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.